Dinosaurs like you need to make room for digital natives. The words hung in the conference room like smoke. I sat there, looking at Marissa Halperin across the polished table, her laptop open to some presentation about workforce optimization. 30 years with Veltrin Logistics Solutions, and this was how it ended. Not with gratitude or even a decent severance discussion, with an insult wrapped in corporate speak. My name is Howard Gentry. I am 61 years old and I have been the senior systems architect at Veltrin since before this company knew what the internet was. I built their inventory management system from scratch. Every line of code, every database table, every integration point that kept their trucks moving and their clients happy. When the company ran off floppy disks, I was there. When we moved to hard drives, I was there. When we went networked, I designed the infrastructure. But sitting in that conference room in our Dayton, Ohio headquarters, watching Marissa flip through slides about digital transformation and generational workforce challenges, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't about my work anymore. It was about my age. The new cloud platform requires a different mindset, she continued, not looking at me directly. Fresh thinking, agile methodologies. Our clients expect innovation, not maintenance of legacy systems. Legacy systems, that's what she called the software that handled 40,000 shipments a month, without a single critical failure in over 2 years. The system that integrated with 17 different carrier APIs and automatically optimized routing to save the company nearly $3 million annually in fuel costs alone. I could have explained how her precious cloud platform would need to interface with that legacy system, how the data migration alone would take months of careful planning, how there were custom modules and integrations that existed nowhere in any documentation because I had built them during weekend emergencies over the years. Instead, I just nodded. "You're probably right," I said quietly. Something in my voice made her pause. Maybe it was the lack of fight. Maybe it was how easily I agreed. She had expected an argument, a desperate plea from the old man trying to save his job. Instead, she got acceptance. "Well," she said, her tone softening slightly, "I appreciate your understanding, Howard. Human resources will handle the transition details." I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned back. "Marissa, when you implement the new system, make sure someone documents the legacy integration points. They matter more than you know." She was already looking at her phone, dismissing my advice with a wave. That was when I knew this was going to hurt her more than it hurt me. I started at Veltrin in 1994 when it was just a regional trucking company with 12 drivers and dreams of expansion. Back then, they tracked shipments with clipboards and filed invoices in metal cabinets. The owner, Frank Veltrin, hired me to computerize the operation after his accountant told him he was losing money on misfiled paperwork. I was 31, fresh from a programming job at a manufacturing plant that closed down. Frank offered me $28,000 a year and a corner desk in what used to be a storage closet. I took it because I needed the work, but I stayed because I saw the potential. Over 3 decades, I watched Veltrin grow from a dozen trucks to a fleet of 800 vehicles serving the entire Midwest. I built the dispatch system that coordinated their routes. I designed the client portal that let customers track shipments in real time. When they acquired smaller competitors, I integrated their systems into ours. When regulations changed, I modified the compliance modules. When they needed to interface with new partners, I wrote the APIs. My wife Ellen used to joke that I cared more about those servers than I did about our garden. She wasn't entirely wrong. While she planted roses and tended tomatoes, I nursed database clusters and optimized query performance. But Ellen understood. She knew that my work mattered, that keeping those systems running meant keeping 800 drivers employed and thousands of shipments moving on time. Ellen passed away 4 years ago. Cancer took her in 6 months, and work became my anchor. My daughter Katie lives in Portland with her husband and twin boys. My son David is in the military, stationed in Germany. The servers and code became my constant companions, more reliable than people, more predictable than family. Frank retired 7 years ago and sold Veltron to a logistics conglomerate called Transglobal Holdings. The new ownership brought in executives like Marissa, who spoke in buzzwords and measured everything in quarterly metrics. Frank used to visit the server room and ask how things were running. Marissa had never set foot in the building's basement where the real work happened. The warning signs started 6 months ago. Marissa began holding meetings about modernization initiatives and cloud migration strategies. She brought in consultants who spent 2 weeks interviewing people about pain points and optimization opportunities. They never talked to me. When I tried to schedule time with them, I was told they were focusing on user experience and workflow assessment. Last month, she announced the selection of Cloudflow Systems as their new platform provider. The announcement came with glossy brochures and promises of seamless integration and minimal disruption. I read through the technical specifications and immediately saw the problems. Cloudflow was designed for companies starting from scratch, not for businesses with 30 years of custom configurations and data. I wrote a memo outlining my concerns. Marissa never responded. The final meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in November. Marissa called it a transition planning session, but I knew what it really was. She had her laptop open to an organizational chart with my name already grayed out. "Howard, we've decided to move in a different direction with the systems architecture role," she began, reading from notes she had prepared. "The new platform will require skills that align more closely with modern development practices." I let her finish her rehearsed speech about restructuring and strategic realignment. When she was done, I asked a simple question. "Who will handle the legacy integration during the transition?" She looked confused. "The Cloudflow team will manage the migration. They have experience with data transfers." "What about the custom modules, the carrier API bridges, the real-time routing algorithms?" "Those will be replaced by Cloudflow's native functionality." That was when I realized she had no idea what she was dismantling. Cloudflow was a good platform, but it was designed for standard operations. Veltron's competitive advantage came from the custom tools I had built over decades. The route optimization system that saved millions in fuel costs. The predictive maintenance module that prevented breakdowns. The client integration that processed orders directly from major retailer systems. None of that existed in Cloudflow's standard package. None of it was documented anywhere outside my head and my personal notes. I could have explained it to her. Could have walked her through the technical dependencies and shown her why a direct migration would fail. But something in her dismissive tone, the way she had already decided my fate without understanding what I actually did, made me choose a different path. "I understand," I said. "When do you need me to wrap up?" "End of the week would be ideal. We want to minimize disruption." I nodded and stood up. As I walked to the door, she called after me. "Howard, we'll need you to document your work before you leave. Create a handover guide for the Cloudflow team." I turned back and smiled. "Of course. I will document everything that is officially part of Veltron Systems." The distinction in my words went right over her head. I spent the rest of Tuesday and all of Wednesday creating a comprehensive handover document. 67 pages covering database schemas, user accounts, backup procedures, and system architecture. Everything that existed in the official documentation. Everything that any competent systems administrator could find in the file directories and configuration folders. What I did not document were the custom scripts running in hidden directories. The integration modules that I had written during emergency fixes and never moved to the official codebase. The authentication bridges that let Veltron's system talk to partners who used incompatible protocols. Thursday morning, I packed my personal items and left my badge on the security desk. By Friday, I was consulting for Apex Core Freight, one of Veltron's biggest competitors. The call came on Monday at 7:43 a.m. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen, reading the news on my tablet when my phone rang. The caller ID showed James Morrison, one of the senior developers who had worked under me for 8 years. "Howard, we have a problem." I set down my coffee. "What kind of problem?" "The Cloudflow migration started this weekend. Everything looked fine until this morning when the first shipments tried to process. The system is rejecting half the orders." I walked to my home office and opened my laptop. What error messages are you seeing? Authentication failures on the carrier APIs. The Cloudflow team says their platform handles all the major carriers, but nothing is connecting properly. I pulled up the technical specifications I had saved from Cloudflow's documentation. Their platform supported the standard EDI protocols that most carriers used for basic communication. What they did not support were the custom authentication methods that several of Veltron's key partners required. James, check the integration logs for Henderson Freight and Ironwood Transport. I heard him typing. After a moment, he swore softly. Both showing connection refused. Howard, these are two of our biggest partners. Henderson Freight alone accounted for 30% of Veltron's eastbound volume. Ironwood handled most of their automotive parts deliveries. Both companies used proprietary systems that required custom authentication bridges that I had built years ago during contract negotiations and never documented because they were considered temporary fixes that became permanent. The Cloudflow consultants are saying this is a configuration issue, James continued. They want to know where the API documentation is stored. There is no documentation for those connections. They were emergency builds. Marissa is asking if you can come in and walk the Cloudflow team through the setup. I looked out my kitchen window at the November morning. Gray sky, bare trees, the kind of day that matched my mood perfectly. Tell Marissa that I no longer work for Veltron. If she needs consulting assistance, she can contact me through proper channels. Howard, this is bad. We have clients calling already. Orders are backing up. I felt a flicker of sympathy for James and the other developers who were dealing with the chaos. They were good people caught in the middle of Marissa's poor planning. But sympathy was not the same as responsibility. James, I gave Veltron 30 years. I documented everything I was supposed to document. If there are systems that were not properly transitioned, that is a management decision. After I hung up, I opened my email and found 17 messages from various Veltron addresses. Urgent requests for information, demands for immediate assistance, increasingly frantic messages from the Cloudflow consultants asking for legacy system documentation that may have been overlooked. I deleted them all without responding. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Marissa herself. Howard, we need your help. There seem to be some integration issues that were not anticipated. What kind of issues? The new platform cannot connect to several key partners. The Cloudflow team says you built custom interfaces that are not documented. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Apex Core Freight portal I had been given access to that morning. Their systems were clean, well documented, and refreshingly straightforward to work with. Marissa, I provided comprehensive documentation for all official Veltron systems. If there are undocumented customizations, they were emergency fixes that fell outside normal development procedures. We need those fixes documented now. This is costing us thousands of dollars in delayed shipments. I understand. My consulting rate is $200 per hour with a minimum 40-hour engagement. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. You are holding the company hostage. I'm offering professional services at market rates. If you prefer to work with the Cloudflow consultants, that is your choice. She hung up without another word. Tuesday morning brought another call from James, but this time his voice carried a different tone. Not just frustration, but genuine fear. Howard, it is worse than we thought. The order processing system crashed completely around 2 a.m. When Cloudflow tried to restart it, they corrupted the main shipment database. I stopped drinking my coffee. How corrupted? 3 days of shipment data. Gone. Orders that were supposed to deliver today, we have no record of. Drivers are calling asking for updated routes, and we cannot tell them where they are supposed to go. This was not just an integration problem anymore. This was a complete system failure that would ripple through every aspect of Veltron's operations. Clients would not receive their shipments. Drivers would sit idle burning fuel and wages. Partner companies would start looking for more reliable logistics providers. James, tell me exactly what the Cloudflow team did when they tried to restart the system. He walked me through their actions. With each detail, I felt a growing sense of dread. The Cloudflow consultants had assumed that Veltrin's database structure followed standard industry conventions. They had run automated migration scripts designed for simple e-commerce platforms, not for the complex multi-tier architecture that I had built to handle Veltrin's specialized operations. They overwrote the lookup tables, I said quietly. What does that mean? It means they destroyed the connections between shipment records and route assignments. Even if they restore from backup, they will lose all the dynamic routing optimizations. I could hear James typing frantically. Howard, how do we fix this? The question hung in the air. I knew exactly how to fix it. I had designed the system with multiple redundancy layers specifically for this kind of failure. There were backup processes and recovery protocols that could restore everything within 6 hours, but those protocols were not documented in any manual that Veltrin possessed. The recovery process requires access to the legacy administration tools that only I knew how to use. Can you walk me through it over the phone? I looked at my laptop screen where I was reviewing Apex Core Freight's technical requirements. Clean, modern, well-designed systems that respected both innovation and reliability. No emergency fixes, no undocumented customizations, just solid engineering built to last. James, the recovery process would take me 6 hours working directly on the servers. Walking someone else through it would take 3 times as long and carry significant risk of making the corruption worse. So you will come in? My consulting rate is still $200 per hour. Minimum engagement is now 80 hours to account for the complexity of the recovery process. James was quiet for a moment. Marissa will never approve that. Then Marissa will need to find another solution. After I hung up, I called my contact at Apex Core Freight. Janet, this is Howard Gentry. Is that consulting contract still available? Absolutely. When can you start? How about this afternoon? Janet laughed. Having second thoughts about retirement? Something like that. I spent the rest of Tuesday morning updating my resume and preparing for my afternoon meeting with Apex Core Freight. Their office was in downtown Dayton, less than 10 miles from Veltrin's headquarters. The irony was not lost on me. At 3 p.m. I walked into their building and met with Janet Ellis, their chief technology officer. She offered me a 6-month contract to evaluate and modernize their systems architecture. The pay was triple what I had made at Veltrin, with full autonomy over technical decisions and no interference from executives who confused buzzwords with strategy. I signed the contract that afternoon. By Wednesday morning, word was spreading through Dayton's logistics community about Veltrin's system failure. In an industry where reputation meant everything, news of delayed shipments and lost orders traveled fast. I learned about the scope of the damage not from calls or emails, but from casual conversations with former colleagues who had taken jobs at other companies. Tom Brennan, who used to manage Veltrin's client accounts, had moved to Meridian Freight 2 years ago. He called me Wednesday afternoon. Howard, we just got calls from 3 major retailers asking about switching their logistics contracts. Apparently, Veltrin lost 2 days of automotive parts shipments that were supposed to hit dealerships this week. The automotive industry operated on just-in-time delivery schedules. A 2-day delay could shut down assembly lines and cost manufacturers millions in lost production. Those were the kinds of failures that ended long-term contracts and destroyed business relationships. How bad is it looking from the outside? I asked. Bad. Henderson Freight is telling people that Veltrin cannot even connect to their dispatch system. Word is that they are looking for a new logistics partner for their eastern routes. Henderson Freight had been Veltrin's partner for 15 years. Losing them would mean losing nearly 40% of the company's revenue. Thursday brought another call from James, but this time he sounded exhausted. Howard, Marissa authorized the consulting contract. She wants to know how quickly you can get here. I looked at my calendar. I had a full day of meetings scheduled with Apex Core Freight's development team, reviewing their current systems and identifying opportunities for improvement. Real work with people who valued expertise over politics. I cannot start until Monday. Monday? Howard? We are bleeding money. Clients are canceling contracts. James, I understand the urgency, but I have other commitments now. The silence stretched for several seconds. Other commitments? I accepted a consulting position with another company. Veltrin's emergency does not supersede my professional obligations. I heard him talking to someone in the background, probably Marissa. When he came back on the line, his voice was strained. She wants to know which company. That is confidential information. If Marissa wants to discuss the terms of a consulting agreement, she can call me directly. Friday afternoon, Marissa finally called. Howard, we need you to prioritize Veltrin's recovery. This is an emergency situation. I understand. My availability for emergency consulting is Monday through Wednesday of next week. 80 hours at $200 per hour, plus expenses. That is $16,000. Plus expenses. This is extortion. I was sitting in Apex Core Freight's conference room, reviewing system architecture diagrams with their development team. Clean code, proper documentation. Colleagues who treated technical expertise as valuable rather than obsolete. Marissa, this is market rate consulting for emergency system recovery. If you prefer to continue working with the Cloudflow team, that is your choice. The Cloudflow team says they cannot fix this without documentation that you never provided. I provided documentation for all official Veltrin systems. Emergency fixes and undocumented customizations were outside the scope of normal handover procedures. You sabotaged the migration. I followed the exact transition requirements that you specified. Nothing more, nothing less. She hung up again. That evening I received an email from Frank Veltrin, the company's original owner. He had heard about the system failure through his network of industry contacts. Howard, I'm sorry this happened. You deserved better. If you ever want to talk about starting something new, call me. I saved his email. Starting something new sounded appealing. Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., I received a call from David Wells, chairman of the board at TransGlobal Holdings. Not Marissa, not the Cloudflow consultants, not the frantic developers trying to hold the system together with emergency patches. The chairman himself. Mr. Gentry, I believe we need to talk. I was sitting in my home office preparing for another day of productive work with Apex Core Freight. Clean systems, professional colleagues, no emergency fixes or undocumented customizations needed. About what, Mr. Wells? About Veltrin's current situation. I understand you were the senior systems architect there for 30 years. That is correct. And I understand there have been some complications with the technology transition. Complications. That was one way to describe a complete system failure that had cost Veltrin 3 major clients, corrupted years of operational data, and left 800 drivers sitting idle while managers figured out where shipments were supposed to go. The transition appears to have encountered some technical challenges, I said. Mr. Gentry, I am going to be direct. We need you to fix this. Name your price. I looked out my window at the November morning. 3 weeks ago, I had been a dinosaur who needed to make room for digital natives. Today, I was the only person who could save the company. Mr. Wells, I appreciate the call, but I have other professional commitments now. What would it take to change your mind? It would not be about money. It would be about respect. The silence lasted nearly 15 seconds. What kind of respect? The kind that comes from understanding that experience has value, that institutional knowledge matters, that 30 years of building something from scratch cannot be replaced by consultants with glossy brochures. I understand. What are your terms? Full reinstatement as Chief Systems Architect. Complete authority over all technical decisions. Immediate termination of the Cloudflow contract. And Marissa Halperin's resignation. Mr. Gentry, those are my terms, Mr. Wells. Take them or continue working with your digital natives. I hung up the phone and returned to reviewing Apex Core Freight's system requirements. Real work with people who valued what I brought to the table. The news broke Wednesday morning. Marissa Halperin had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review of the Cloudflow implementation. David Wells personally called to inform me that TransGlobal Holdings was prepared to meet my terms if I would reconsider returning to Veltrin. I declined. Instead, I spent Wednesday afternoon in a meeting with Frank Veltrin and Janet Ellis from Apex Core Freight. Frank had an idea about starting a new logistics technology company, one that would focus on building reliable systems for regional carriers who were tired of being oversold by cloud platforms that could not handle real-world complexity. "We could do this right," Frank said. "Build something that works. Document it properly. Train people to maintain it." Janet nodded. "Apex Core would be our first client. We have 6 other regional carriers in our network who are looking for better technology solutions." I looked at both of them across the conference table. Frank, who understood that good systems took time to build properly. Janet, who valued experience over buzzwords. People who saw technology as a tool to solve problems, not as a marketing opportunity. "When do we start?" 6 months later, Veltrin Logistics Solutions was acquired by Henderson Freight in a distressed asset sale. The Cloudflow migration had failed so completely that recovery would have cost more than the company was worth. 800 drivers found new jobs with other carriers. Most of the office staff was laid off. I heard that Marissa found a position with a startup in Silicon Valley, where she could implement digital transformation initiatives without the burden of legacy systems